My daughter-in-law parked me by the trash bins. Now she pays rent. To me. Eleanor didn't cry when they shoved her into the garage. She funded the house. They gave her floor space. So she turned her silence into signatures. And by the time the wedding ended, the mother-in-law they tried to erase owned everything they stood on. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. I thought she was joking, until she pointed at the garage and said, "That should be fine for your stay." The words floated in the air like dust motes caught in the glare of afternoon light. Madison stood at the threshold, manicured finger extended toward the side door. Her smile was stretched too thin and too sharp. Eleanor blinked once, then again. "That?" she asked quietly, her voice wrapped in grace and disbelief. Madison didn't waver. "It's clean." Jason put a mattress down. "There's even a space heater." Jason appeared behind her, holding 2 mugs. "It's only temporary, Mom. You know how tight things are with wedding planning." Eleanor looked at her son, the same boy who once sobbed into her lap after losing his first dog, the same boy who begged her to co-sign his first apartment lease, who called her when his startup nearly folded. Now he couldn't meet her eyes. Her lips curled into a polite smile. "Of course, dear. I wouldn't want to be in the way." The garage smelled of motor oil, cardboard dust, and old paint. A twin mattress had been pushed between a metal toolbox and a stack of half-used paint cans. Above it, a single bulb hung from the ceiling like a noose, casting harsh shadows across the floor. She set her suitcase down without a sound. The silence was her armor now. That night, Eleanor lay awake listening to the click of the garage cooling, the occasional hum of passing cars outside, and the faint laughter echoing from the main house. Madison's laugh always had a note of cruelty in it, like someone smiling at a cracked vase. Eleanor didn't cry. Instead, she stared at the ceiling rafters and let her memory unfold. 4 years ago, Jason had called her in a panic. The house he and Madison wanted was just out of reach. They were short, 100,000 short. Jason had whispered over the phone, "Mom, please, I'll pay you back. We just need it for the down payment. You'll be a co-owner on paper, just to secure the mortgage." She hadn't even hesitated. She wired the funds within 24 hours. The next morning, Eleanor rose early, brushed her graying hair into a tight bun, and made herself a cup of instant coffee from a travel kettle she'd brought herself. She sat on the edge of the mattress, sipping from a mug that read, "Mother of the Groom," in tacky silver lettering, a passive-aggressive hand-me-down from Madison. She opened her phone, searched one name, Gwen Hargrove, her attorney of over a decade, estate planning, real estate, the one who once told her, "You should protect your investments, especially with family." She typed one line, "We need to activate the clause," quietly. She didn't press send, not yet. She stepped outside first. The air was crisp. The house glowed like a polished trophy, its hedges trimmed, its stone path pristine. She stared at the living room window, warm yellow light flickering behind it. That used to be her kind of space. Hardwood floors, clean windows, bookshelves, dinner smells. Now she was parked by the toolbox. Eleanor took a long breath, the kind that sharpened her spine. Then she walked back inside the garage and pressed send. Sent. Delivered. Read. A moment later, her screen lit up with a reply. "Gwen. Finally. I've been waiting for this day." Eleanor texts her old lawyer. "We need to activate the clause." Quietly. "They called me a guest in a home I helped buy." The word freeloader wasn't spoken loudly. In fact, Madison barely said it above a whisper, but Eleanor still heard it from the hallway, just enough to freeze her in place. "I mean, technically she doesn't pay rent," Madison said, her voice echoing from the kitchen as she laughed with 2 of her bridesmaids. "Jason says she helped us once with the house, but come on, she lives in our garage and calls herself family." A champagne cork popped in the background, followed by more laughter, light and careless. Eleanor stayed completely still, her hand resting lightly on the hallway wall. She had been on her way to return a folded dish towel, one she had washed herself, despite the passive-aggressive label Madison had placed on it. Guest linens. Now she wasn't so sure she'd return it at all. Later that evening, long after the kitchen had quieted down and the bridesmaids had gone home, Eleanor sat on the edge of the twin mattress in the garage. The silence pressed in around her like a weight. Only the quiet hum of the old fridge and the distant whir of traffic kept her company. She held a cup of tea in her hands, lukewarm now, and stared at the concrete floor. Her mind, however, was not quiet. She remembered exactly when it all began. 2 years ago, Jason had asked her to meet at a quiet cafe not far from where he and Madison were hoping to buy their first home. He had sounded nervous on the phone, but she had agreed without hesitation. After all, she was used to stepping in where he faltered. Jason had come to her with wide eyes and fast words, explaining that the perfect house had hit the market, but they were short on funds. Almost $100,000 short. Madison's parents couldn't help, and the banks had tightened lending. They needed the money quickly, and he didn't know who else to ask. "I don't want to pressure you, Mom," he had said, looking down at his coffee. "But if we miss this window, it's gone." She remembered the way his voice cracked, the way he looked embarrassed to ask, but still expected her to say yes, and of course, she had. "I'll wire it to you tomorrow morning," she had told him. He had hugged her, whispered thank you, and added, almost as an afterthought, "It's probably best if your name isn't on the deed. Just for tax simplicity." Eleanor had paused, frowning. "But if I'm putting in that kind of money—" "We'll write up an agreement," Jason had interrupted quickly. "Just so it's clear, for legal peace of mind. We'll make it official." And they had. She'd insisted on it. A single-page, notarized document detailing her contribution, and a clause giving her a legal claim to the property if ever there was a dispute or change in occupancy. It had seemed smart at the time, precautionary, unlikely to ever matter. She hadn't looked at that document in months. Until now. Eleanor pulled an old accordion file box from the back of a plastic bin in the garage. Her knees creaked as she knelt down on the cold concrete, hands brushing over envelopes labeled with Jason's name, college tuition receipts, and account summaries she had once printed with pride. Finally, she found it. A red folder. Inside, the original agreement, still crisp despite time. Her signature beside Jason's. Notarized. Sealed. The clause was clear as day. This contribution constitutes a co-ownership claim, enforceable in the event of dispute, displacement, or primary residence status. Her lips pressed together, not in anger, but in certainty. That night, she opened her laptop and drafted an email to Gwen Hargrove, her longtime attorney. Subject: found the document body co-ownership clause confirmed. Notarized, timestamped, signed. Jason forgot this part. Occupancy equals activation. Looks like I'm not just a guest, I'm a stakeholder. She attached a scan of the document, then hit send. Moments later, a reply came through. Gwen. Good, then we begin. Quietly. Eleanor confirms via email. Her financial contribution was tied to a co-ownership clause Jason forgot. Turns out I wasn't just excluded from the main house, also the wedding. It began with a white envelope left on the kitchen counter, sealed with a gold-foiled sticker that read, "The Ellison Wedding." Eleanor noticed it in passing, resting against a glass vase filled with artificial peonies. She reached for it instinctively, expecting her name to be on the front. It wasn't. Instead, her invitation arrived later that afternoon, tucked awkwardly under the garage door by a passing delivery man. No envelope. Just a trifold card, slightly bent at the edges, with her name misspelled. Ms. Eleanor Easton. Overflow table. Patio tent. Eleanor turned the card over twice in her hand. No personal note, no RSVP card, not even a seat number, just the vague promise of additional seating near the buffet station. She held it for a moment longer before placing it quietly on her folding table in the garage. Outside, the house buzzed with wedding prep energy. Madison's mother was visiting, her voice sharp with instructions. There were color swatches on the kitchen island, linen samples hanging from cabinet handles, and a bakery tasting box Eleanor hadn't been invited to sample. That evening, Eleanor wandered back into the house to retrieve a book she had left in the living room weeks earlier. She moved slowly, deliberately, not wanting to disturb anyone, but as she passed the open door to the guest room, what used to be the nursery, she heard Madison's voice. "She's wearing that awful blue blazer again. You'd think someone living in a garage would have more shame," Madison whispered to a bridesmaid, who snorted into her wine glass. Jason was seated nearby, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up. I'm sorry, but no one wants to see polyester shoulder pads in wedding photos. I'm surprised you're even seating her at all." The bridesmaid giggled. "Oh, trust me," Madison replied. "The tent near the buffet is the farthest I could put her without needing binoculars." Jason finally looked up, then back down again. "Can we not make this a thing?" he mumbled. "She's already kind of weird about all this. Just don't make it worse." Madison rolled her eyes. "She should be grateful she's even invited." Eleanor backed away before anyone saw her. She moved like a ghost, her feet silent against the hardwood floor, her spine straighter than it had been all week. She didn't cry, she didn't storm out. She returned to the garage, closed the door with care, and sat at her small desk. She had something else in mind. The next morning, a delivery van pulled up outside the house. "Who's getting flowers?" Madison called out from the porch in her robe. The driver held out a sleek black basket, wrapped in white ribbon, with a card attached. Madison reached for it, but the man said, "It's not for you." He turned, walked past the hydrangeas, and handed the arrangement to Eleanor, who was standing at the edge of the driveway in a navy sweater and pressed trousers. She took it with a small nod and walked back toward the garage. Inside the basket, a bottle of French champagne, a box of lemon shortbread cookies, and a silver pen. Beneath it all, a cream-colored envelope addressed in elegant cursive. "To Gwen. Let's begin." She pulled out her phone and sent a message. "Gift basket sent. Instructions inside. Please use discretion with the deed process." Seconds later, a reply came through. "Gwen. Want to keep the deed change off their radar?" Eleanor stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "Exactly." She paused, then added one final line. "And keep the overflow table waiting." The attorney replies, "Want to keep the deed change off their radar?" She replies, "Exactly. I found out about my own son's rehearsal dinner through Instagram." The picture was perfect, almost cruelly so. It showed Jason in a soft gray linen shirt, Madison in a floral wrap dress, and a long dinner table beneath string lights, and a pergola wrapped in ivy. Champagne flutes sparkled in every hand. The caption read, "Rehearsal dinner magic. Where countdown to Ellison." Eleanor stared at the photo, her finger hovering just above the screen, not daring to double tap. The glow of her phone lit up the corner of the garage where she sat, balanced in an old wooden chair that wobbled slightly on the concrete. She hadn't been invited. There had been no call, no text, no mention of it when Jason walked past her that morning, grabbing his blazer from the laundry room and offering only a distracted, "Big day tomorrow." And yet there he was, laughing under fairy lights, smiling beside a woman who had barely acknowledged Eleanor since she arrived. She didn't feel sad, not exactly, just struck still, the kind of still that feels like falling without motion. Jason came home late. Eleanor was reading at her table, a novel open but ignored. She heard the front door, the low murmur of shoes being kicked off, and then the fridge opening in search of something sweet. She didn't move. He peeked into the garage with a hesitant smile. "Hey, Mom." Eleanor looked up. Her face was calm, unreadable. You didn't get the email about tonight?" he asked, scratching the back of his neck. "There was no email," she replied, her voice gentle but exact. He winced. "Must have gone to spam." Her eyes didn't blink. "Did it go to spam for Madison too?" Jason hesitated. "It wasn't her call. The planner handled it." "The planner?" Eleanor said, finally closing her book. "Interesting. I didn't know the wedding planner had access to our family guest list." Jason said nothing. She nodded slowly. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day." And just like that, the moment passed. Or rather, it was filed away. The next morning, Eleanor logged into her joint savings account. The balance blinked at her. $128,642.29. She stared at it, remembering the day she first added Jason as a co-user. He was 25, overwhelmed with the business loan paperwork, and she had said, "Just until you're steady." That was 4 years ago. She began the transfer in silence, her fingers moving methodically. From joint savings to Easton Trust, private transfer. Amount $80,000, memo, personal consolidation. The page refreshed, the number dropped. She didn't flinch. By late afternoon, Eleanor was folding laundry in the garage when Madison's phone lit up on the kitchen counter. The screen angled just enough for Eleanor to read the preview through the glass of the open window. Text from bridesmaid group chat. Jason's old baggage is still in the garage. Ugh, at least she won't be in half the pictures. It was the word baggage that made Eleanor pause, not with hurt but recognition. The insult wasn't original. She'd heard it before, in boardrooms and family reunions alike. It was always code for woman who won't disappear on cue. She folded the last towel and went to her laptop. By 7 p.m., she had created the paperwork. A new LLC anonymous holding. Name, Cardinal Roots LLC. Purpose, real estate holdings. Mailing address, P.O. Box number 129, Easton County Authorized Agent, G. Hargrove, SQ1. She reviewed the digital signature field, pressed her finger to the touchpad, and clicked Submit. The screen blinked. Registration confirmed. The mouse hovered over a blank real estate intake form. Title search request, ownership history, lien clearance. She filled in one address, their address. The home Madison flaunted, the kitchen where Jason scrolled instead of speaking. A property review would begin Monday morning, and they wouldn't even know it. Eleanor creates an anonymous LLC and opens a new real estate file. She parked me by the trash bins. I parked her future into legal limbo. The hum of the garage door echoed like thunder as it closed behind Eleanor, sealing her once again into the room they didn't call a room. There was a mattress against the far wall, flanked by 2 broken-down chairs and a lopsided bookshelf. The scent of motor oil and mildew clung to the concrete. A plastic tub labeled Christmas served as her nightstand. Outside the garage door, she heard Madison laughing, the high-pitched sound bouncing off the driveway bricks as she spoke with the florist. "Just stack them near the curb," Madison called out. "That whole side is trash pickup anyway." Trash pickup, Eleanor's makeshift entrance, wedged between the recycling bin and an old leaf blower, was now the flower delivery zone. And still, not a single word of apology from Jason. He passed Eleanor in the mornings like she was a neighbor they didn't quite like but couldn't evict. Not yet. 2 hours later, Eleanor sat at her desk, a collapsible table beside the water heater, with her laptop open and a steaming cup of chamomile beside her. Her phone buzzed quietly, vibrating against the metal edge. New message from Gwen Hargrove. Confirmed. Original financing clause never removed. Your ownership percentage holds. We're ready to execute the transfer to Cardinal Roots LLC. Need your e-signature. Eleanor leaned back, letting the words settle, so Jason hadn't followed through on the paperwork years ago. He had left her name buried in the footnotes of a co-financing agreement, probably assuming it wouldn't matter. Probably assuming she wouldn't matter? They had called her baggage. She still held the handle. She clicked sign. The screen pulsed. Ownership transfer in progress. It took less than 5 minutes. By the next morning, the title to the house was under review by the county registrar. A quiet legal tsunami was now crawling toward the Ellison wedding. The notice arrived folded inside a cream envelope, hand-delivered by a courier in a black suit. Jason was in the living room setting up sound equipment when the man rang the bell. Madison answered, still in a silk robe, her hair half-curled. "Yes?" she asked, eyes scanning the logo. "Official notice. Please sign." "What notice?" she snapped, reaching for it anyway. Jason joined her just as she unfolded the letter and froze. Title review initiated. Property transfer filed via Cardinal Roots LLC. Jason paled. "What the hell is Cardinal Roots?" "Who the hell is Cardinal Roots?" Madison hissed. Jason skimmed the paperwork, the color draining from his face. "Oh my God!" Madison's voice cracked. Jason, fix this. Call someone. By mid-afternoon, Eleanor's suitcase was packed, 2 changes of clothes, her laptop, and a single hardcover book titled The Art of Quiet Control. She didn't slam doors. She didn't say goodbye. She left a folded note on the kitchen table. Out for a few days. Don't wait up. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the row of palm trees lining their cul-de-sac, Eleanor stood on the balcony of the Del Mar Resort and Spa. Her room was spacious and flooded with golden light. The bed had 6 pillows, the sheets smelled faintly of lavender, and there were fresh orchids on the table beside a bottle of wine already uncorked. She sipped her drink slowly, watching as headlights flickered across the Ellison driveway, her former garage now a shadowed corner in her rear view. Below, a valet pulled up in a convertible, but Eleanor barely noticed. Her phone buzzed again. Gwen. Madison's already contacted 2 attorneys. They're scrambling. We're secure. Eleanor smiled to herself and typed 2 words. Let them. She checks into a luxury resort, with a view of their street. They expected me to play humble. I went invisible instead. For the first time in months, Eleanor's phone didn't buzz. Not a single call. Not even a pity text. She had gone completely silent, and the silence rang louder than any confrontation could have. The blackout wasn't accidental. It was meticulous. She had turned off location services, redirected her mail to a private P.O. box, and left her last message in delicate cursive on a sticky note taped to the back of the garage door. Taking some space. Don't worry. I won't get in the way. And they didn't worry. They didn't even ask. Madison, on the other hand, wasted no time rewriting the story. She's had some health things, she whispered to her friends while folding name cards at the bridal suite. Memory lapses, you know. Jason and I decided it was better for her to rest. By the time the florist arrived, the whisper had become a full-blown narrative. Guests asked gently, "Is Eleanor all right?" Madison placed a hand to her chest and gave a soft sigh. "She's comfortable. That's what matters." Jason said nothing. Not once. Not to Madison. Not to his aunts. And certainly not to his mother. At the Del Mar Resort, Eleanor stretched out in a sun-drenched cabana, watching slow clouds drift across the Pacific. A tray of sliced mango and sparkling water sat beside her, untouched. Her phone was face down on the table, but every so often she flipped it, just to scroll through the wedding hashtag. Ellison ever after. Countdown to Madison. Where is Mom? The last one made her chuckle. Apparently, a few guests were less convinced by Madison's performance. Eleanor recognized some of the usernames, old family friends, even a cousin who had RSVP'd with a handwritten note and a paragraph of admiration for Eleanor's years of grace and quiet strength. That cousin hadn't received a seat at the ceremony either. On the 4th day of her no-contact retreat, Eleanor received a call, from a number she didn't recognize. She let it ring twice before answering. Hello? A frazzled voice cut through the line. Hi, is this Mrs. Eleanor Vaughn? Yes, speaking. This is Daniel from Willow and Vine Catering. We're following up about the final deposit for the Ellison wedding reception tomorrow evening. We still haven't received the confirmation, and your name is listed as the account holder. Eleanor smiled, sitting up. Interesting. And no one else has called to confirm? No ma'am, it's under your contract, signed last November. Eleanor said, walking over to the balcony and pulling open the curtain. The wind from the ocean hit her face. Please hold off on releasing anything until you hear directly from me. Of course, but the rehearsal dinner was yesterday. If we don't hear back by 6 p.m., we'll need to cancel the cake delivery. Oh, I wouldn't cancel it, Eleanor replied. I'd just make sure it's charged to the right person this time. She ended the call before he could respond. Back at the Ellison house, Jason stood in the hallway holding a tie he hadn't figured out how to knot. Madison paced in circles. I told them the deposit was handled. You didn't check? She glared at him. It was your mother's caterer. I assumed. You assume a lot, don't you? They both froze, the words lingering like smoke in the air. Jason turned away, loosening the tie and muttering, This whole thing's turning into a circus. Madison pressed her hands into her temples. Just fix it. Outside, a guest's car door slammed. Wedding week had officially begun, and the mother of the groom was still missing, but not gone. Eleanor stood at her balcony, glass of champagne in hand, and watched from the distance as everything began to unravel without her. The wedding caterer calls. Eleanor still holds the deposit. She told guests no gifts. I told them the truth. The first tray of hors d'oeuvres hadn't even made it past the front gate when guests began canceling. Not with a bang, not with confrontation, just silence. One by one, RSVPs quietly vanished like dew in morning sun. Madison stood in the backyard, surrounded by ivory chairs and gold-trimmed table runners, frowning at her phone. The RSVP app pinged again. Another cancellation, that made 11 in 2 hours. Jason leaned against the patio post, tie half-tied, eyes sunken. Maybe it's the weather? Madison looked up at the clear sky. It's 72 degrees and not a cloud in sight? Jason shrugged and checked his phone. Another aunt had texted, "Shame your mother isn't part of the wedding. We thought better of you." Jason didn't reply. 2 hours earlier, Eleanor sat cross-legged on her hotel bed, silk robe wrapped around her and a warm laptop balanced on her knees. The email was already drafted. "Dear friends and family, if you're reading this, you've probably noticed I won't be at the wedding. This was not my choice. I was asked to stay out of sight, out of plans, and ultimately out of heart. I won't ask you to take sides. I just thought you deserved to know that I was not invited to my only son's rehearsal dinner, that I was offered a garage while the guest rooms stayed untouched, and that when I stayed silent, they spun stories about my health instead of my presence. I wish the couple well, but I will not reward disrespect with ceremony, with sincerity. Eleanor Vaughn." She hit send. The guest list was already saved in her personal contacts, all 74 of them. She didn't include Madison's work friends, just the ones who knew what it meant to be a mother. Then she closed the laptop and poured herself a glass of white wine, already chilled. By early afternoon, the gift table at the wedding venue sat awkwardly bare. 2 wrapped boxes and 1 card, all placed by distant coworkers who hadn't checked their email. A sign written in calligraphy read, "Your presence is the only present we need." Madison had insisted on it weeks ago, declaring, "Gifts are tacky. We're not that kind of couple." But now she paced in her heels, glancing over her shoulder every few minutes at the empty space. "It's the RSVP system," she muttered to herself. "It's glitching. It has to be." Jason was on the phone again, face drawn. "No, Aunt Marie. I understand. No, I won't guilt you. I just... Yeah. We'll miss you." He hung up and met Madison's eyes. "This is getting out of hand." She spun toward him. "Then do something." Jason exhaled through his nose and walked back inside. He didn't have the courage to say what he was really thinking, that maybe, just maybe, his mother hadn't been lying. That maybe the silence she offered was sharper than any speech she could have given. At the resort, Eleanor sat in a small corner conference room across from a sharply dressed man in navy. "The full transfer?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, tapping the pen once on the table. "My shares in the tech company, yes, all of them." He blinked. "That's a sizable investment." "I know. And you're transferring to..." Eleanor slid over a sheet of paper. "To Helen Cheng, my late husband's former assistant. She's starting her own firm. I believe she'll know what to do with it." The man glanced at the form. "She's not connected to the company at all." "Exactly." He hesitated a beat, then handed her the signature page. Eleanor signed in elegant, deliberate strokes. No hesitation. Somewhere across town, Jason received a notification from his board of directors. Equity shift filed. Yvonne H. Cheng. His hands trembled. "What is it?" Madison asked, turning from her compact mirror. Jason didn't answer. Eleanor signs over her shares in Jason's startup, to someone else. "I was always the silent partner, until now." The moment Jason opened the email, something in his chest shifted, like the pressure in a cabin right before a plane drops. Subject line, "Stakeholder change notification." He blinked, rereading the sender. "Board at prodevinc.com." Jason clicked. Dear Mr. Ellison, this is formal notice that effective immediately, Eleanor Vaughn has executed a full transfer of her equity holdings. The shares, comprising 23.7% of total Class B stock, have been reassigned to Helen Cheng, who has been approved by the advisory committee. Your updated cap table and investor access portal are now live. Board Secretary Prodev Inc. He didn't even finish reading. His mouth went dry as he whispered, "She pulled out." Madison glanced up from the bedroom vanity, halfway through curling her hair. "What?" Jason looked up, eyes glassy. "My mom, she just sold her shares. All of them." Madison straightened, curling wand forgotten midair. "To who?" He swallowed hard. "Some woman named Helen. She's not even on the team. I don't know who she is." Madison walked over, barefoot on the marble floor, and snatched the phone from his hand. "Let me see." The more she read, the paler she got. "Do you understand what this means?" Jason said quietly. "She funded your Series A. What happens now?" Jason rubbed the back of his neck. "The board's going to ask questions. That kind of ownership shift, it's going to trigger a reassessment." "A reassessment of what?" "Of everything." At the Del Mar Resort, Eleanor moved calmly through the breakfast buffet in a pressed linen blouse and pale slacks, selecting berries and smoked salmon with surgical precision. Her phone buzzed, but she didn't look. Not yet. She carried her tray to a quiet patio, unfolded the napkin into her lap, and finally glanced at her screen. 4 missed calls from Jason, 2 from Madison, 1 from the company's general counsel, and a single text from the board liaison, just 2 words long, "Executed successfully." She smiled softly, took a sip of green tea, and opened a blank text thread. To Jason. Message: "Enjoy your wedding gift. It's not refundable." Sent. Back at the house, Jason stared at the message in stunned silence. "She knew," he muttered. "Knew what?" "That she was our largest investor. That she could burn it down in one step. And she waited until today." Madison paced the living room, stepping around floral arrangements that now looked more like decorations for a funeral than a celebration. "She's not coming back from this," Madison said. Jason looked at her, eyes sharp. "You mean we're not coming back?" Madison froze. "You pushed her out," Jason snapped. "First it was the garage, then the rehearsal dinner, and now she's out of the company too." Madison's face tightened, defensive. "She chose this." "No," he said. "She calculated this." Eleanor leaned back in her patio chair as the breeze lifted strands of her silver hair. A seagull cried in the distance. A waiter passed and offered her champagne. "No, thank you," she said. "Not yet." She picked up her tablet and opened the live newsfeed for tech startups. There it was, already making the rounds. Investors shift spark speculation at promising tech firm Prodev Inc. She wasn't named, but she didn't need to be. She had never wanted the spotlight, only the leverage. Now she had neither a garage nor a seat at the wedding table, but she had power, and she had just used it. Eleanor sends a text. "Enjoy your wedding gift. It's not refundable." They exchanged rings and lost everything else. Rain had not been in the forecast, but as the string quartet played the first bars of Canon in D, a soft drizzle kissed the rows of white chairs on the lawn, already half empty. The florist had gone over budget, the tent rental had been delayed, and now, between weather and whispers, the wedding of Madison Hart and Jason Ellison was unraveling in real time. Madison clenched her bouquet with white-knuckled fingers, her perfect manicure trembling against the ivory roses. She scanned the faces in the crowd, a few co-workers, some college friends, one estranged uncle, and far too many empty chairs marked with name cards that would never be claimed. She could feel the absence like a pulse. Eleanor's absence. The groom looked uncomfortable, dabbing sweat from his forehead as the officiant welcomed the remaining guests. His eyes flitted toward the back again and again, as if expecting his mother to appear late, repentant, soft-spoken. She didn't. And neither did over a dozen people who had RSVP'd, then mysteriously backed out. Inside the reception tent, the staff bustled about, trying to distract from what had become a ghost wedding. Appetizers sat untouched. A champagne tower leaned slightly to the left. Madison's maid of honor kept whispering something to her about damage control, but all Madison could hear was the ticking in her chest. When the best man toasted the couple with a half-hearted joke, Jason lifted his glass, but barely drank. Then his phone vibrated on the sweetheart table. He glanced down. Subject: Notice of Compliance Audit, Prodev Inc., from Financial Oversight Committee. He blinked. His jaw slackened. Madison leaned over, whispering, "What now?" He passed her the phone. As she read, her lips moved slightly, like she didn't believe the words were real. Then she hissed, "She did this." Jason didn't respond. He didn't need to. Eleanor was 3 blocks away, seated at the corner table of a rooftop bistro, watching the chaos from a distance. Her chair faced the event venue, and through the raindrops on her wine glass, she could see the white tent where everything was coming undone. She dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin and folded it neatly beside her plate. The waiter brought her tea. "Will you be ordering dessert, ma'am?" Eleanor offered a small smile. "Oh no, this is dessert." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small envelope, handwritten in elegant cursive, to Madison. She had sent a copy earlier by certified mail, but she'd brought a backup, just in case. Inside was a single-page letter and a stapled packet. The top read, "Notice of Financial Declaration LLC Title Ownership Disclosure." Enclosed back at the venue, the newlyweds were surrounded by soggy roses and empty champagne flutes. Guests were already drifting out after dinner, many skipping cake, others whispering awkward goodbyes. Madison could take no more. She kicked off her heels and marched out of the tent, dragging her silk train through the wet grass until she reached the street. She knew where Eleanor was staying. She had tracked the reservation earlier that week, trying to look composed while doing so. She didn't knock on the hotel suite door. She barged in. Eleanor sat calmly in an armchair, legs crossed, a book open in her lap. "Well," Madison snapped, "are you proud of yourself?" Eleanor didn't look up from the page. "You look damp. You ruined everything. My wedding, Jason's company, the guest list." "I didn't ruin anything," Eleanor interrupted smoothly, closing her book. "I simply reclaimed what I built." Madison's cheeks burned. "You think this is power? It's petty, vicious." "No," Eleanor said, rising slowly. "It's overdue." She walked to the table, picked up the envelope she'd prepared, and extended it gently toward Madison. "What's this supposed to be?" Madison scoffed. Eleanor's smile was faint, but cutting. "Did you check the mail?" Madison froze. Eleanor stepped closer. "Because by now, you've received a letter confirming that the home you call yours is currently in legal review, under the name of an LLC, mine." Eleanor smiles and says, "Did you check the mail?" "They gave me the garage. I gave them 30 days. The envelope was stiff, thick, and cream-colored, almost elegant for something that would detonate a household. It sat squarely on the doorstep, tucked under the welcome mat as if the words inside were shy. Jason bent down to retrieve it, still nursing a hangover from wedding champagne and tension, and didn't even notice the return address until his thumb sliced the seal. 2 words made his throat tighten. Notice. Vacate. The air in the kitchen was thick with the smell of burnt toast. Madison, still in her satin robe from the honeymoon suite they couldn't afford, scrolled mindlessly on her phone at the breakfast bar. Her freshly done nails clacked against her coffee mug with a rhythm that grated more than soothed. Jason stood frozen by the island, holding the letter in one hand, the edge crinkled from how tightly he gripped it. "Something wrong?" Madison asked without looking up. He didn't answer. Instead, he handed her the document in silence. Her eyes scanned the lines. The blood drained from her face so quickly she almost dropped the mug. "This is from Eleanor's LLC?" she muttered. "She's evicting us?" Jason nodded once, slowly. 30 days, legal filing, effective immediately. Madison's voice turned shrill. "Is this a joke? She can't evict us from our own house." Jason finally spoke, voice hoarse. "It's not our house, Madison. It never was. Not fully." Flashback. 2 weeks earlier. In a quiet office with dark cherry wood shelves and the smell of expensive paper, Eleanor leaned forward to sign the last page of the property reassignment forms. Her attorney, Lisa Chan, slid the documents over with a satisfied smile. With the LLC holding majority equity, you can exercise control over any cohabitation decisions, Lisa said, including occupancy. Eleanor's pen didn't hesitate. Good, let's proceed. Now, Madison paced the kitchen like a trapped animal, her robe fluttering with every step. She's insane. This is retaliation. We can fight this. Jason didn't move. He was staring at the deed framed on the wall, the one he'd hung when they first bought the house, when Eleanor wired them the down payment. He suddenly remembered her soft warning then, "Make sure you keep the paperwork clean, darling." Clean always shows better in court. He hadn't listened. Madison stormed to the living room, already dialing a number. "Yes, I need a family law specialist. Urgent. My mother-in-law is evicting us. No, I don't have a lease agreement. Why would I need one?" Jason followed behind her, rubbing his temples. "We signed something years ago. It was about her contribution, remember? I think she still had a clause." Madison froze. "Clause?" Jason nodded. 60% equity if I ever defaulted or failed to provide formal housing. She asked for it just in case. I thought she was being dramatic. Madison slammed the phone onto the couch. "You thought wrong." Across town, in a penthouse suite draped in silk and silence, Eleanor stood barefoot by the floor-to-ceiling window. Below, their house sat quietly on its lot, too clean, too hollow. Her fingers curled around a champagne flute as she watched movers deliver her dry cleaning to the concierge. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply exhaled. Her phone pinged. A message from Lisa. Eviction notice delivered. Tracking confirmed. All quiet so far. Eleanor typed her reply without hesitation. Let the silence speak. Meanwhile, Jason dug through a storage box in the attic. Old contracts, tax forms, dusty wedding invitations. Near the bottom, under a cracked photo frame, he found it. A slim blue folder labeled Family Investment Deed. His fingers trembled as he opened it. There it was, highlighted in yellow, under a paragraph he barely remembered reading at the time. Co-contributor retains controlling equity rights, 60%, in the event of cohabitation dispute, negligence, or exclusion from agreed housing terms. Jason sat back, paper in hand, eyes wide. Madison entered the attic, wild-eyed. "Did you find anything?" He looked up slowly. "Yeah," he whispered. "I found the part where we handed her the house." Jason stared blankly at the document as Madison sank down beside him, knees hitting the floor hard. "I gave her the garage," he said in a hollow voice, eyes still fixed on the clause. Madison's voice cracked. "And she just gave us 30 days. She thought I was too old to notice. I was too smart to forget." The folder was plain, faded blue with bent corners, but inside it was a fire strong enough to reduce a marriage to ash. Eleanor didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The receipts did all the shouting. Jason stood in the living room, the eviction letter still fresh on his mind. Eleanor placed the folder gently on the coffee table, next to a tray of untouched pastries Madison had laid out earlier in a desperate attempt to normalize what couldn't be undone. "I thought you should see what you forgot," Eleanor said softly, but her eyes were steel. Jason opened the folder, and with each page he turned, his expression changed. First confusion, then guilt, and finally disbelief. Receipts. Not a few, but dozens. Chronologically arranged, neatly labeled. Wire transfer. $100,000, down payment, check copy. $15,000, Samantha's MBA tuition. Online order, $2,375. Wedding dress deposit, paid under Eleanor's name. Bank transfer, $10,000. Emergency startup float, handwritten by Jason. Jason's voice cracked as he flipped through. "You kept all of these?" Eleanor nodded, the faintest curve of a smile on her lips. "You thought I was too old to remember, but I was smart enough to document." Madison burst into the room like a thunderclap, her hair disheveled, eyes wide and furious. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Vindictive old woman with her little paper trail? Eleanor didn't flinch. What I enjoy, she said coolly, is clarity. You called me a freeloader in front of your friends, but here's proof I bankrolled the life you brag about on Instagram. Madison's hands balled into fists. You don't scare me. No, Eleanor said, but your employer might. The next envelope Eleanor pulled from her bag wasn't for Jason. It was addressed to HR Director, Skylight Media, Inc. Jason's head snapped up. Wait, what is that? A formal letter, Eleanor said, holding it just out of reach. With an audio transcript of Madison calling me a parasite and bragging about manipulating elder finances. Madison went pale. You recorded me? I installed a vent mic, Eleanor said calmly, after you joked about putting me in a care facility. Remember that dinner party? Jason looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Madison lunged forward, but Eleanor held the letter tighter. You can't do this, Madison hissed. Oh, I already did, Eleanor said, placing the sealed envelope into a padded courier bag on the table. It goes out today. Jason sat heavily on the couch, elbows on his knees, his hands pressed to his face. Mom, I promised I'd pay you back. Years ago, I meant to, You forgot, Eleanor said, her tone gentler. Until now. He looked up at her, eyes red. I didn't mean for it to be like this. Eleanor tilted her head. But you let it become this. Madison opened her mouth again, but Eleanor cut her off. You stripped my name from the wedding seating chart, my room from the house, and my worth from your conversations. But I kept the proof. I always do. Outside, the sky cracked with early summer thunder. Fitting, Eleanor thought. There was always a storm before calm. Jason stood slowly, unsure. What happens now? Eleanor picked up her purse and slung it over her shoulder. Now? I mail this. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the knob. Oh, and Madison. What? Madison spat. Eleanor turned slightly. You might want to clear your calendar. The next morning, an email from Madison's HR department pinged into her inbox. Subject: Immediate leave pending investigation. Her fingers hovered over the screen, trembling. Eleanor sipped her coffee from the resort's terrace, watching the clouds part. One letter down, 2 more to go. The sound of packing tape echoed like gunshots in a war already lost. Boxes piled high by the front door, labeled in a handwriting that looked more desperate than organized, and from the driveway, Eleanor watched quietly, her name still carved into the foundation they were now being forced to flee. A moving van sat awkwardly in front of the house, its hazard lights blinking like a silent alarm. Inside, Jason was bent over, unplugging the stainless steel espresso machine Eleanor had bought Madison as a wedding shower gift. Madison appeared from the hallway, dragging a suitcase and wearing a hoodie 3 sizes too large. Her hair was tied in a loose knot, her face drained of color. Take the blender too, she snapped, and the air fryer. If she thinks she's keeping everything. Jason stood up slowly. We shouldn't be taking appliances, not the ones she bought. Madison rolled her eyes. She's not here. She will be, Jason said, his voice lower. We have 23 days left. You really want to pick this fight? Madison opened her mouth, then closed it, biting the inside of her cheek hard enough to leave a mark. The blender stayed on the counter. Upstairs, in what used to be Eleanor's guest room, the one Madison refused to decorate, boxes sat partially filled. Jason pulled out an old sweatshirt Eleanor had folded in a corner drawer years ago. He stared at it for a moment, then placed it in a pile marked Donate. Madison entered behind him, holding a stack of prenup documents. We need to revisit this. Jason didn't turn. What? If you're not going to sue her, I need legal assurance, she said, pressing the papers into his chest. You're spineless with her, Jason. Always were. He didn't take the papers. This whole thing, it's spiraling. She stepped back, eyes cold. Then do something before we lose more. Jason looked at the prenup. You think suing my mother is going to fix this? Madison crossed her arms. Either she pays or I walk. Outside, a knock at the door startled them both. Jason walked down the stairs and opened it to Find a courier in a navy windbreaker holding an envelope. Jason Kellerman? Yes? Please sign. Jason scrawled his signature and took the document. Madison peered over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the bold header. Property exit agreement. Final transfer notification. She tore it from his hand. She's selling it? She's actually selling the house? Jason didn't answer. He walked past her to the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water with a tremble in his hand. He could see his reflection in the faucet. He didn't recognize the man staring back. Madison slammed the envelope down on the counter. You're seriously going to let her evict us from our own lives? Jason didn't move. She humiliated us at the wedding. She sabotaged your business, and now she's throwing us out. What kind of man just stands there? Jason turned slowly. Maybe the kind of man who's realizing he married the wrong woman. Madison's face went blank. I begged you to treat her with respect, Jason said, more to himself than her. You said she was in the way. She bought this house, she saved my company, and all you gave her was the garage. The silence in the room was no longer awkward. It was loud, like glass cracking under pressure. Madison didn't respond. She turned, picked up a box, and walked out the door. Upstairs, Jason sat on the edge of the stripped mattress, a small folder in his lap. The prenup, still unsigned. He pulled out his phone, hovered over a name that suddenly felt unfamiliar. He didn't call Madison. He called Eleanor. She answered on the second ring. Jason, she said. He exhaled shakily. I don't even know where to start. Her voice was calm, unshaken. Then start with the truth. His fingers trembled as he gripped the phone tighter. Mom, what did I sign? She parked me by the door. I drove away with the deed. The keys to their new rental jingled in Jason's hand like loose change in a pocket he didn't quite own. Madison stood beside him on the porch, arms crossed, waiting for the lock to turn. The neighborhood was smaller, quieter, not what they were used to, but it was what they could afford. Or so they thought. The duplex sat on the edge of town, modest but well-kept. 2 units, mirror images, divided by a low stone wall and freshly mulched garden beds. Madison scanned the entry with mild disgust as Jason jiggled the key again. This door sticks, he muttered. Madison exhaled sharply. That's because it's cheap. He didn't reply. The moving van behind them groaned as a worker unloaded their stripped-down belongings. No espresso machine, no designer bar cart, just essentials now. Inside, the air was stale, smelling faintly of cleaning solution and leftover paint. Jason dropped the keys onto the counter and wandered through the kitchen, trying not to notice the laminate counters, the old fridge humming slightly louder than it should. Madison walked into the master bedroom and yanked open the closet doors. God, it's tiny. Jason leaned against the doorframe, quiet. It's temporary. She turned, eyes narrow. It better be. Across the duplex wall, a light flicked on in the neighboring unit. Madison glanced through the blinds. A silhouette passed, tall, upright, unmistakably familiar. Jason walked to the window beside her and froze. No way. He stepped onto the porch and looked across the driveway. Parked neatly in the adjacent unit's driveway was a black Lexus SUV, the same one Eleanor had always driven, though it looked freshly waxed now. The door to the other unit creaked open. Eleanor stepped out. Hairbrushed, pearls gleaming, she held a small ceramic pot with fresh basil in it. She placed it gently on the shared garden ledge, then looked up, locking eyes with Jason. Good morning, she said, her tone as neutral as fine porcelain. Madison's voice rang from behind Jason. What is she doing here? Jason stared at his mother. Mom, are you visiting someone? Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. No, dear. I own the place. For a second, everything went quiet. No birds, no traffic, not even the rustle of wind. Madison stepped forward, eyes wide. What do you mean you own the place? I bought it last month, Eleanor replied, casually brushing a leaf from her sleeve. Through a trust. Technically, you're leasing from Palm Fern Properties LLC. That's me. Jason blinked. You knew we were moving here? I orchestrated it, Eleanor said plainly. I assumed you'd like something close to town. Madison made a strangled noise. You set us up? You let us move into one of your properties like rats in a trap? I offered affordable housing, Eleanor replied calmly. Consider it a step toward humility. Jason was pale. Why didn't you just tell me? Because you weren't listening, Eleanor said softly. Now you don't have to. Everything's in writing. She turned to leave but paused. Oh, and one more thing. She reached into the inside pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a sleek, black remote. She clicked it once. From a small speaker mounted beside her door, a familiar voice crackled to life. She should just stay in the garage. It suits her. Dusty, out of the way, and easy to forget. It was Madison's voice, bitter and clear. Jason turned toward his wife slowly, his jaw tightening. The audio stopped. That clip was played at my attorney's office, Eleanor said, looking directly at Madison. For documentation, for closure. Madison's face flushed with horror. You recorded me? Number you made the garage my address, Eleanor said with measured ice. I simply paid attention. She disappeared back into her unit, closing the door behind her with a gentle finality that felt louder than any slam. Jason didn't speak. He just sat down on the steps, elbows on knees, hands folded. The moving van behind them beeped softly as it backed out of the driveway, its job done. Madison stood in place, her eyes darting toward the neighboring window, then at the house they no longer owned, then at the man whose loyalty was crumbling beneath her feet. Inside her unit, Eleanor settled at her desk. The afternoon light hit the edge of her pen as she opened the envelope marked Final Addendum. She scratched out a name on her will, and in bold, steady handwriting she wrote, Primary beneficiary removed, Jason Kellerman. She sealed the envelope, lips pressed into a quiet smile. Now we're even. The smell of lemon oil and lavender floated through the foyer as Eleanor stepped across the polished hardwood, her heels clicking with calm precision. Outside, the autumn sun lit the hedges she'd personally reshaped, now trimmed and blooming. She was home again, not just in brick and wood, but in ownership, in presence, in power. And this time, there were no boxes in the garage. Just orchids on the windowsill and music playing softly from the speaker in the kitchen. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as though its walls remembered what it was like to be honored. Eleanor moved through each room deliberately, smoothing tablecloths, adjusting flower arrangements, lighting one tapered candle after another. She was hosting her first real gathering since reclaiming the home, a quiet brunch for the women who had once seen her only in passing. Old friends from the library board, the kind widow from across the street, the estate attorney who'd become more of a confidant than a legal ally. The dining room sparkled under the restored chandelier she had personally selected when the house was first purchased. The table was set with china she hadn't dared to unpack in years. Welcome, she said warmly, as guests began to arrive, their voices rising like soft violins. There were gasps, compliments, warm hugs, and the occasional knowing glance from those who'd heard whispers of what had unfolded. During the meal, the conversation danced between recipes and politics, gossip and gratitude, but Eleanor stayed graciously above it all. She didn't brag, she didn't gloat, but she did serve champagne in the same crystal flutes Madison once packed away in a box labeled irrelevant. Halfway through dessert, Eleanor excused herself briefly and returned with a small velvet box. Inside was a single gold-plated wedding photo frame, its corners engraved with delicate vines. She placed it gently on the foyer table next to the front door. Inside the frame was a printed check, clearly marked, Pay to the order of Mr. and Mrs. Kellerman, amount $0, 0 cents. Memo, wedding contribution adjustment, signed in precise ink, Eleanor S. Kellerman. The room fell quiet for a moment before soft laughter began rippling through the guests. One woman raised a glass. To strategic silence, she said with a smirk. Eleanor smiled finally. By sunset, the guests had gone. The last of the flutes clinked in the sink as Eleanor rinsed them herself, intentionally, methodically. She placed each one on the drying rack like glass trophies. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. She let it ring. A minute later, a knock echoed through the house. Firm, repetitive. She wiped her hands, calmly walked to the door, and opened it. Jason stood on the porch, alone. He looked thinner than he had weeks ago, not from weight loss, but from pressure, from confusion, from the slow crumbling of certainty. His eyes darted to the foyer behind her, and then to the gold frame near the door. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked hoarsely. "No," Eleanor said, voice smooth as silk. "It's a receipt. I didn't come for another lecture. I didn't offer one." Jason swallowed hard. She left. Eleanor's expression didn't change. She only tilted her head slightly. "She said I failed to protect her from you." Eleanor stepped aside just enough for him to see inside. The house glowed with calm, curated joy. It didn't need defending. It needed acknowledgement. "Did you?" she asked. He didn't answer. Jason reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, and held it out. "I found this," he whispered. "It's your original financing letter, the one I said we lost." Eleanor took it carefully, unfolded it. She didn't speak, because the signature at the bottom, his signature, was unmistakable. And Jason? He was finally starting to read the fine print. Jason stood silently on the threshold, a man without a map. The envelope in Eleanor's hand felt heavier than paper. It was the weight of consequence, of memory, of debts long overdue. She didn't offer a hug, just the lease agreement. Eleanor didn't flinch as Jason sat across from her at the breakfast table, the same one where he once laughed with his new bride while she sipped tea alone in silence. Now the laughter was gone. So was the bride. Outside, the morning sun filtered in through spotless windows, casting geometric patterns across polished wood floors. Inside, the ticking of the wall clock filled the silence between mother and son. He looked thinner, paler, his suit coat rumpled. The boy she raised had returned a man, humbled, but not yet healed. "I'm sorry," he finally said, barely above a whisper, "for everything." Eleanor stirred cream into her coffee slowly, her silver spoon clinking with calm deliberation. "Are you sorry because you understand?" she asked without looking up. "Or because you lost?" Jason blinked, visibly taken aback. She didn't wait for him to answer. Sliding the manila envelope toward him, she nodded at it. "Your new lease, month to month, utilities included. You'll be on the left unit." He reached for it hesitantly, as though touching it made this real. "You bought the duplex?" She nodded once, eyes steady. "You're my landlord," he said quietly. "I'm your mother," she corrected. "But I've learned that those roles are no longer synonymous." Later that day, Eleanor stood in the backyard, wearing garden gloves and a sun hat, the same kind Madison once joked made her look farm chic. She knelt beside what used to be the garage entrance, trowel in hand, planting clusters of lavender and creeping thyme where oil stains used to live. The concrete slab had been ripped out weeks ago. In its place, soil, life, and a curved brick path leading to a tiny wrought iron bench. It wasn't just landscaping, it was resurrection. As she pressed roots into the soil, the scent of earth and new beginnings wrapped around her like an old cardigan. Somewhere behind her, wind chimes rang softly, a gift from one of her brunch guests. "Need help?" came Jason's voice from behind the fence. She didn't look back. "I think you've helped enough." Silence. Then his voice, steadier this time. "She left, for good. Said she wasn't made for all this humbling." Eleanor placed another sprig of thyme into the earth. "She was never made for gardens, just garages." Jason stepped closer, but not too close. "I signed the lease. I'll pay on time." "You will," she said, and meant it. He exhaled, unsure what to say next. "Do you hate me?" he asked finally. Eleanor stood up slowly, dusted her gloves, and turned to face him fully. "No," she said, "but I know better than to trust promises made at the height of comfort. This house, this land, the life you almost threw away, these weren't built on apologies. They were built on sacrifice. Mine." Jason swallowed hard. "I miss the version of me you respected," she added, "so I became her again." As the sun dipped lower, Painting the sky with streaks of coral and gold, Eleanor stood by the flower bed, watering each new plant as if it were a truth that deserved to grow. Inside, the home was hers again, legally, emotionally, spiritually. No whispers in corners, no mattress by the toolbox. The house had remembered her, even if the people inside it once tried to forget. She glanced toward the now empty driveway where Madison used to park. Always crooked, always rushed. Not anymore. She parked me like baggage. Now I hold the keys to everything she wanted.